Today I'm going to talk about phases for product development. My name is Guilherme and I'm a project management specialist. I help people to start and develop their career. And before I start the content today, please follow for more content and make sure you like this video so also more people can learn with that and more people can start learning project management. So why this is important for you? Basically, if you are working in a project, so in this case I'm going to talk about the product development project, it's important that you understand from the start to the end from a project. You need to understand the different phases, how they connect with each other and how they interact. And why this is important? Well, because this is the basis to create a timeline, and this is also the basis so we also can start to identify a critical path. And as a project manager, you need to know and understand the critical path for the project. Otherwise, basically, you cannot manage the project. That's why this is so important. So that's really, you need to understand those different phases so you can create a proper overview of your project. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble and it's going to be very difficult to manage the entire project because you never know what's going to happen next and you never know what's following. You're going to have challenges identifying the critical path. Before I start to present you the project, the different phases for a project for developing a product, I want to make sure that you also understand there because there's a common misunderstanding. Well, if you have been studying project management, you probably know from the PMBOK that PMBOK has what's called the process groups. These process groups are basically initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closing. In the PMBOK 6th edition, there are 49 processes in total, and those 49 processes they are divided to different knowledge areas, as you can see here in the screen. But what does it have to do with anything? Because a lot of people, they confuse those process groups with a process phase. For example, if you have been around for a bit longer, this is something from the PMBOK from 5th edition, which shows the initiation, the process groups like initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, control, and closing, and the level of interaction that you have through time. And a lot of people, when they see that, they mix up these process groups with development phases, which they are not. Why? Because a development phase, it depends from product to type of product. So you can have there a big range of projects and you're going to find different development phase there. However, you see that in a lot of those development phase, you can have a part of planning. Of course, you have executing the development itself, you have monitoring, control, and closing gets in the end of the project. So not necessarily if you're planning a project, you're going to see this initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, controlling, and closing process. So what you're going to see? Well, as I mentioned, there's all types of projects that are out there. For example, engineering, procurement, and construction projects. You're going to have product development. Here, when I talk about product development, I'm really talking about more physical product. I'm not thinking about much on software development or any IT development. Why? Because when you are talking about IT, very commonly or in most of cases, you use an agile approach where most likely or most commonly that's Scrum. And when you're executing with Scrum, you're not going to see that. You're going to see something that's different. Which, again, that's not a problem because different projects will require different approach and also different constraints, different situations. That's what you need to think about. That. What I want to achieve here is making sure that at least you do not mix these process groups, initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closing, with the project phase. So right now you know that this is not a project phase. So what is a project phase? What I'm going to present to and explain here, I'm going to use an example of the automotive industry. Why? Because the automotive industry, they have a global standard. Most of the automotive companies around the world, they follow a global standard there. And why that's easy? Because you can find plenty of material right there, and that if you're talking about all the automotive companies that are there for different pieces, components, and so on, you already can reach a very big range of projects. And of course, if you understand the development phase in the automotive project, once you are looking for, for example, a product development in other industries, you are going to see a lot of similarities. And how do I know that? Well, because I've been in different industries. I've worked with automotive, I've worked with energy construction, and I'm working right now in the semiconductor industry, also product development. Even though the process phases they are different, you can see a lot of similarities. So to help you to understand, let me give you a first introduction here on how the automotive process works. Basically, you have five phases if you are following the APQP. Uh, that's the automotive general standard for product development. And here you can see the different phases where you have a plan and define program phase, following again the standard from automotive. Then you have a product design and also development phase there. Then you have a process design and development. Then you have a product and process validation. And then the last phase, you go to production. Of course, when you talk about production, it's just a part of the production. They're ramping up of the production. If you're in the automotive scenario where you're expecting mass production, you're not going to follow this to the entire production. So let me elaborate a bit more for each of those phases. So basically, you also can see here, this is not mine, by the way. I also find this in Google, but I like it because it's very nice to understand it. So the first phase of the project, you are going to have the initial concept there, when you have your first initial requirements, your set of constraints, and you want to understand if you have a feasible product. Then you kind of have you can have an MVP, minimum viable product, with to prove that the concept design that you have there, it works. Because every time if you're developing something that's completely new, it might end up that you have a concept there, but the concept there does not work in practice. Like the design does not work, or when you assemble something does not work as you are expecting to do that. And in this phase, of course, you can have a lot of different things. Even you can start to have the sampling, because when you are looking for the automotive, what you are going to expect, you have different types of different maturities of sample there. You can have, for example, a maturity depending on the type of product. That again, you can maybe 3D print something just to have an idea about your concept, but you also can have a prototype, like manually manufacturing, like with prototype tooling, until you go for something that was more mass production. So in this initial phase of your project, you are looking for understanding the requirements, a proof of concept there, and have an overview to make sure that you have a business case, of course. Then you get a program approval there. So in this case, it's still a conceptual design. And of course, once you get the product approval, it's when you're going to move for what's called the product design phase. Here you're going to go much deeper into the project requirements, or into the product requirements there. And you start to design, for example, if you're designing components, you start to design those components into detail. And there's always an overlap between these phases, because, for example, when you start to design something, it's designed something that works, and another thing is design something that can be manufactured in scale, like mass production. Because of course you can design something and you can make something in the lab, but of course it's not doable. If you need to do millions of parts, you need to have scale, And if you don't have a process that can be scaled, then you don't have a project. That's why there's always an overlap between this product design phase and this process design phase. You see that, of course, the process design started always sometime after the product design, but they need to have the overlap to make sure that also the product design can adapt from what's required for the process design. And when you're looking for process design, you're going to have different types of requirements. For example, you are going to have FMEA analysis, simulations. You are going to have a prototype phase where you're going to really build something in something that's more representative for a mass production. What's the difference between a concept or your initial concept for something that maybe you have only a simulation, and this prototype needs to reflect much closer what needs to go to the serial production. For example, the type of materials that you're going to use, you expect them to be hopefully final. The type of tooling, maybe it's still a prototype tooling, but you are expecting that the process to manufacture something, it's already much closer what you're going to have in a serial process. What's very interesting here that in the automotive they have what's called the design validation part, that you're going to take those prototypes and you are going to put like in testing under qualification test, what you're going to check performance, durability, and a lot of other items to make sure that you can confirm your design work. And of course, in parallel, you're already developing your process, looking for the design, you're looking for the steps that you need to have this in a serial production. So you are going to reach a maturity if you pass, of course, everything in your design validation, you follow your process development, and at some point you reach your maturity in your process, and you can have what in this example here, it's kind of called pilot. But what's that? It's basically another type of prototype with a higher maturity. What I mean by a higher maturity, that's something that was produced already in a manufacturing line, in a serial production mode. That's something that's 100% representative what you would have in production, of course only on lower quantities. And what you do with these here, you would go for a product and process validation here. That's the other phase here, and again you're going to submit those parts through testing to make sure you can release. So you see that even though you start with planning as the process group, and when you do the planning, you have at least a very good level of planning for all the other phases. And the interesting part of using this automotive standard, that you already have a list of the deliverables that you're going to need, like a design review, FMEA, design validation, and a lot of other documents that you are going to need to make sure that you can progress like that. So each of those phases they have deliverable, and why it's relevant and how these help you to have a really good understanding. Well, you know that to start a project, you need to have these high-level requirements. You need to have some type of concept. Then you need to have a design for a prototype. This prototype will go for a design validation. With the design validation results, you have another loop to improve your design if it's required, of course, and another loop to improve your process. Then you improve again your process, your design. You produce something from serial production that's representative from a serial production. Then you put in test again before your final release. And if you understand those steps, you kind of start to draft out or see clearly what would be your critical path. And of course, depending on the type of product, you are going to have different bill of materials. And of course, these different type of materials will have different lead times, which is going to influence your critical path. But very often, what you find in those critical paths for product development is the qualification there, because there are some tests that might take a couple of days, but there are also some tests that takes a couple of months. I've worked in a product development project that we had a corrosion test that would take 4 months, 120 days before we get the results. So you can imagine that was in the critical path of the project. And also, what's something very interesting for this type of project when you're talking about product development is that you're going to see for the different levels of complexity that you can have in a product development, you can have more or less phases. Meaning that if you do not need a product development phase because you might have a design, you just want to move to a different process. But for example, when I mean a different process, every time you put these products in a different factory, then you also have a part of process development, but you also run a part of product and process validation to make sure those products are okay. And why they're doing that? Because when you talk about serial production, mass production for automotive, sometimes you talk about millions of parts, or depending on the type of product, it can be even billions of parts, like depending on the type of semiconductor. So it's quite relevant that you understand that. And making also a parallel here, any type of product that you are going to develop, and here again I'm highlighting that's a physical product usually, you are going to follow the same steps. Maybe you do not call, for example, right now I'm working in the semiconductor industry. We do not call exactly the same steps, but what you always have there, you always have this part that is the design development, or you also have, let me start again. You also have this part that you're going to collect requirements, make a concept to see if it works or not. Then you create a plan, and then you also start to move for the product to design, development, then you produce parts, then you qualify it before you move to release it. And this can be replicated for all types of industry, because in any type of product that you are working there, usually you have something that you need to design and you need to produce whatever the physical product. Maybe it's a high precision process, then it's a slightly different, or maybe it's a less precision or higher quality depending on the level of quality. There's a lot of constraints about that. But that's to show you that those different phases also they kind of draft, they help you to understand the flow for the project and the tasks that need to happen. Helps you to to have a pretty good idea about the sequence. For example, if you want to do the qualification, you need samples. If you are talking about, in this case, the pilot sample because it's a serial sample, you need the process to be developed. If you need the process to be already mature in development, you need to also have make sure that you have a product design, frozen product design. So every time you go for a new project here, not only automotive, you need to understand those different phases and how those things are interconnected. Because what happens if you do not understand part of that? And then say you are trying to plan. First, if you are here in the planning phase, but this is a blank, you do not understand any of the following phase, what are you going to plan? Without a basic understanding in how your project should progress, there you cannot plan things because you do not understand the steps that need to be taken. So it's quite important there to understand what's the project phases that you have. And while I'm talking like that, I'm also going to add here, because I've already worked like in the energy construction. I worked with EPC project, engineering, procurement, and construction. And there also we had different project phases. The first one was, of course, the engineering part, or together with the planning part. That's what you would see here. Then, of course, you develop a design. Then you move again to exactly the same thing. Of course, the name of the phase will be different because then there you would have something that's procurement, you're buying equipment, but then also you move to construction, that you have the execution there. But don't fall to this idea that you're going to see those process groups and those are phases. Those are not project phases. You need to understand in which industry that you are working on, and you need to understand what are the project phases that you have right there. Even though if you're working on an industry, for example, as I mentioned, EPC, that you don't have a standard procedure as the automotive one. But that's also exactly the idea why I decided to brought this product development following the automotive one, because that's a standard procedure that most of companies around the world follow it. They have sometimes slightly different names, but the phases they're exactly the same, the deliverables are the same, and that helps you. And there's plenty of material to learn about that. So if you plan to work in the automotive sector, that's for sure something that you should at least read about, because that will help you to work in projects with automotive. And again, this is not rocket science, this is pretty standard, but that gives you a huge advantage to fully start to understand a project. And the same thing for any type of industry, you need to have this understanding. Otherwise, you're going to struggle into planning, because each of those phases they have different deliverables. They have milestones that you need to achieve. Sometimes they have customer requirements like samples or things that the customer need. And without knowing that or having this high level view, you cannot plan it. Of course, if you move from one product to another, you're going to need to know a bit more on the product of what you're going to do there. I just mentioned that you can have very types of different bill of material. You can have a lot of different process types. Maybe it's in the process is in only one factory, or maybe there's several factories. You have a better understanding of supply chain. Sometimes you have challenges with raw material. But without this first view, it's not possible to go deeper. Without this first high level understanding, it's really not possible to go deeper. So if you're working on, if you want to work with project management, or if you just start working with project manager, you just start working a planning position, your first step should be first get this high level understanding here, the project phases, how the project flows. Because when I'm talking about project flow, you start already to have the idea about the critical path. Because as I mentioned, if you're developing a product, qualification, more or less, it's always part of the critical path. And then you say, okay, but what do I need to execute the qualification? Then you can start to connect back the dots. But if you do not see this, it will get very difficult. And the product development, as I mentioned, you are going to see, maybe not exactly in this format, but you are going to see a lot of similarities in other projects. In the other industries, you might be working in a completely different industry. For example, I've worked in service development for the healthcare. There, of course, we were developing a service. There was no physical product, but there was also the phases for the development, the steps to move into that. What you should do, you need to have a concept your service, then you need to have a proof of concept your service, and then you start to think about how you're going to escalate this service. You see that the process will be very familiar, because that's the nature of how you're going to create it. It's very simple. You need to design something, and you need to execute. If you're in a construction environment, you're going to execute. If you're in a manufacturing environment, you're going to talk about how you're going to design, how you're going to manufacture something until you get to the product. Or again, if you're in the construction industry, then you can have the projects I worked in the past. I had construction in general, but then you have the civil works or civil construction there. And then you have assembly, and I had like commissioning and testing. But this is really easy to break down. And at the point that you get this into your head, you start to gain the clarity and makes things easier, because you know at this phase, and again, I'm talking about some basic concepts, and I've seen, even experienced people do not understand this, because even though they were working the automotive there, they were not fully aware of the framework. Then they were here trying to launch a product, but they their timeline they did not have any connection among those phases. Well, one phase it's input for the next phase. What happens if there's no connection? Then you cannot identify the critical path. If you cannot identify the critical path, what you are going to manage there, that's going to be more difficult. And at this point, how people start to do that, you just start work on the tasks that you have on hand. And this is something I'm mentioning again because a couple of weeks ago I also started to mentor a junior project manager because he was facing some challenges on his project. Then he reached out and we start to have some sessions. And the thing is, he also did not understand those project phases. Then I asked him, what's the critical path? Then he was not sure, and he started to mention all the types of tasks. But without this view and this organized view how things should work, even though if it's in paper, in reality, you might have a lot of other complications there. It starts to get difficult to organize because then you cannot prioritize. You do not understand what comes first, what goes next, and you do not understand all the connections. You just start to jumping around all the phases, all the different deliverables that you have. And then, of course, you get lost. Then you enter escalation mode, or you enter the firefighter mode, and a lot of things come from there. But this, what I'm telling you today, it's a very basic item that you need to do. Those are the foundations that you need to build as a project manager. And like, don't underestimate the basics. Like, if you look Michael Jordan, why Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan? It was not because he was trying to make all those kind of acrobacies in the air. He was Michael Jordan because he was training hard. He was trying a lot of shots, hundreds of shots per day to improve his fundamentals. And only improving his fundamental was what enables his performance. And with project management here, it's a bit the same. Or it's a bit the same, no, it's exactly the same. You need to work there on your foundation. And that's not something that you say, I know the phase there, I've done a timeline once and it's done. That's something that you continuously need to build. That's something that you continuously need to learn and you study and you grow and you improve. So keep in mind that without this overview, you're going to have a challenge. But also understand that that's not something basic that you're going to do like in half an hour and then it's done. The first step, of course, is gain this general view, and the next step you're going to take this and jump into your timeline. Then you are going to work out this in the details to make sure that you have a good timeline, good level of breakdown with good identification of tasks, that you understand who are the responsibles there, that you can identify the critical path, then you also can make a proper prioritization with your team. I hope you like the content. Make sure you share this content so more people can start to learn about the different project development, the different phase for a product development, and also to make sure that they understand the process groups are different than project phase. If you have questions, just make sure you leave a comment here. I would love to hear what you have in your mind, what are your questions and what your challenges. Make sure that also you like this video. That also helps me to see that this content has value for you and helps me to prepare and produce more content. And make sure again that you follow my profile for more content here on YouTube, but also make sure you follow my profile on Instagram, because there I share videos, but I also share smaller content that you can see. The Q&A box is always open, and of course it's much easier to have an interaction there. Thank you and see you soon. Bye.